Welcome everyone to New York City. We're going to explore Fraunces Tavern here, which is one of the oldest taverns in the entire city. It wasn't running continuously, but it has a very, very important part in American history. This is where George Washington bid farewell to his soldiers. Many important events happen here in Fraunces Tavern. We're going to get an inside tour with the individuals who work for the museum. I'm so excited to show you this beautiful museum. Let me know where you're watching from. My name is Ariel. This is Urbanist, and let's walk inside Fraunces Tavern. Let's cue the music. So here is Mary. She's turning on the camera right now, but I'm so excited to go inside a inside tour. And let me help you out there.
I swear I know how to turn this on.
Oh, you got it. There we go. So thank you so much for inviting me over here today.
You are so welcome. Thank you for coming by.
I'm so excited to get an inside tour of this place.
This is it.
And learn about like the tiny little secrets that most people don't know about when just superficially going around.
So many secrets.
Let us know, what is Fraunces Tavern and where are we right now?
So Fraunces Tavern is one of the only Revolutionary War museums in New York City. We're the only ones that are downtown New York City, so I count it as like, we own this neighborhood. We focus on 18th century colonial tavern life and the Revolutionary War. And if George Washington did anything, he probably did it here. Right here.
Because a lot of people tout that, oh, George Washington slept here, or George Washington sat here.
It's a big crowd puller, I gotta admit. I don't hate it, but he did a lot of things here, along with a bunch of other founding fathers too.
And where are we located in Manhattan?
We are literally at the tip of Manhattan. This was some of the original landfill in the early 1600s, so one of the oldest structure on some of the oldest garbage in New York City.
And a lot of people sometimes call this the oldest tavern in New York City. How does it own that title, or it's not continuous?
It's a bold claim.
Okay.
It's a very bold claim. So the tavern originally opened up in 1762. It did shut down for a while because other people have occupied the building, but it is one of the oldest like remaining taverns because it's in perpetuity. Like it's still Sam Fraunces' Tavern.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So lead us the way.
All right. So our first gallery is our Scott Gallery. So this is the many faces of George Washington.
Oh, okay.
Imagine this. There's an entire room for them. And they all look different, which is the best part. So this is a great indication of just how important photographs are. So if you think about the 18th century, nobody was around George Washington, right? When you
Right.
haven't crossed the Atlantic Ocean, you don't know what he looks like. So you start making your own artist depictions, because think about like Kim Kardashian selling like Us Weekly covers.
Yeah.
You wanted his face on that cover because it was going to sell your newspaper or your magazine.
So he gathered fame in Europe.
Yeah, this was one of the most famous people in the entire world.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, so if you put his face on there, I mean, but that doesn't look like George Washington at all.
Yeah.
So artistic licensing was taken.
And usually he's drawn with this type of, was it jacket or cloak?
Yeah, always in military uniform. Always,
Military,
always, always.
okay.
Even when he approached the Continental Congress as a delegate, he was in full military uniform because that's how he wanted to be remembered as a gentleman.
This one's not so flattering of him.
No, not
looks a
many
little
of
bit-
them are.
Right here we have another one's not so flattering.
Not so nice as well.
And you mentioned, which one is the more accurate one? You mentioned this
So
one.
we've got our Gilbert Stuart, which everybody has seen from the dollar bills. You know this face.
Okay.
I'm sure that you've seen it. He's probably in your wallet right now.
Right.
So this is a pretty good indication of what he would have looked like. But the best one that we have is actually our Houdon bust.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, fancy. So this would have been a live cast done of Washington. So you have to figure our most famous founding father had straws in his nose,
Yeah.
and it had to dry for a couple of hours. So it really makes him humble. But this was a live cast, so if you want to think about what he would have looked like, I mean, in this pose, he's gazing off into the distance. But this is what he would have looked like.
He has a stern look, very similar to the Roman emperor's sculptures.
Yeah, I mean, when you think back to the 18th century and their education, it always goes back to Greece and Rome. So you want to be like those people.
Ah, fascinating.
Yeah, whereas now, today, you think back to your founding fathers and like, what would George Washington do?
And he died with a full head of hair as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was one of the few founders that didn't like to wear wigs.
Indeed. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he spent about 45 minutes on his hair every morning, which is more than I do, so I respect that.
And let me show more of the
Yeah.
different photos.
A
over here, all
potato face
illustrations.
Washington.
Yes, and not so flattering.
No.
He also has a big pot
Yeah,
belly.
he's got
in
a
this
bigger
one.
belly in this one too. They're all like the one in the corner all the way to the left when you slowly turn. If you had told me and asked me, and
Wow.
I am a trained historian, who
Yeah.
that was, I would not have been able to guess.
It's a very like Grecian version of
It's a very weird silhouette. It's a very hot
Fascinating.
take.
And what's this one? Here he's looking very heavenly.
This is him being taken up to heaven.
Okay.
So again, a very big pull from ancient Rome, ancient Greece. You have a couple of angels in there. There's an eagle in there, E pluribus unum, a lot of early American identity symbols.
He might have not approved of something like that, right? Because
No,
was
he
against-
wasn't very flashy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a
flashy.
very frugal, not flashy, like classic gentleman.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, that's why he wore his brown suit to inauguration, because he wanted to not pretend, but he wanted to show that he was one of the people. And he wouldn't wear a giant purple costume like he would in Hamilton.
Exactly. And this one, this was of a monument, or looks like a monument.
Yeah, so this would have been a monument, and they built it, but I don't think that exists. So it's
Yeah.
just like a carbon copy of some sort.
Well,
But
there's-
this one does kind of look like him too, because these two faces look the same.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
when you think about like when you copy and paste somebody's face when you're making an art thing in school, you just take it from there.
Right. And what's over here?
This is our Clinton dining room. So it's in honor of George Clinton, New York's first mayor. So his portrait's up there, and his battle sword is on the mantle.
So for a lot of people who don't know American history, any relation to the
Dare you?
any relation to the president, Bill Clinton?
No, we get
Yeah.
that question a lot. Clinton and Smith and even Fraunces were very popular like surnames
Okay.
in the 18th century. So there's no connection. It would be cool if there was, because that's a great connection to have, but we don't.
Right.
But this is a federal style dining room. So this was a very opposite of what we're going to look at in the second of the long room. Of this was no shirt, no shoes, no service. So you would have to have come in here. There would have been a private door for Fraunces to rent out for his patrons. So you can see there's a nice rug. There's actual forks on the table. The wallpaper is one of my favorite pieces. It's actually Zubair wallpaper.
Oh, okay.
So it's hand painted in France.
hand painted.
Yes.
Wow.
And it depicts scenes of the Revolutionary War. But because it was in France, you have the surrender at Yorktown with the Hudson River Valley backdrop. So not historically accurate, but still beautiful.
There we go. Probably inspiring the Hudson River School to do all these massive landscapes.
Oh, I hope so.
That's fascinating. So did they actually paint it in France and brought the wallpaper over
Yeah,
here?
so there's a few copies still in existence. There's one in the White House that was obtained by Jackie Onassis.
Yeah.
And that is in the room where the president would traditionally host foreign members of like different diplomats and others.
So who would have actually dined here from the founding fathers?
Anybody who could rent a private room. I wish there was there was a great answer, but if you had enough money to rent out a private room, Fraunces would have lent it to you.
And Clinton is considered one of the founding fathers, right?
Yeah, he actually had his house just a couple blocks down, so he would have frequented Fraunces a lot.
Oh, fascinating.
Best food in the neighborhood.
And what is he most famous for? Because he's famous for a lot of things in New York, specifically.
This room, I have no idea.
No.
I know,
Clinton.
no.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking, oh no, somebody better tell me in the
Let
chat.
us know, because he's a very famous guy in New York City history. Do let us know.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And Alexandra on the comments asked what type of style this is. You mentioned
It's
earlier.
a federal style dining room, so it's a little bit past our mission, but still kind of in the realm of the museum's mission.
So I have people watching from all around the world. What is federal style?
Federal style is right after, this is where I don't have a degree in like arty stuff, so I'm gonna butcher this, so I apologize, but it's kind of right after post-construction when the nation is starting to emerge, so you're looking at like a Jefferson-esque post situation.
Oh, fascinating.
It could be wrong. It could be wrong. I am humble, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, do let us know, because I have people watching sometimes who are
Please let
architecture
me know.
buffs. Yeah.
Yeah, I love when the architects and the professionals come in and they're like, actually, and I'm like, that's super important. Thank you very much.
But they were in that phase of building like very classical style. That was
Yeah.
Like, they weren't trying to replicate like a Roman mansion or a
I
Grecian
don't think
palace.
so. No. I mean, honestly, most of my architectural stuff comes from like post 1900 as well. So
Yeah.
don't tell anybody.
All right.
So our next stop is the most famous room in our museum. It is our long room.
And Vish watching, I think Vish, you're from India. He's so interested in American history. This is so great, he
That's
says.
great. Thank you for tuning in. This is our 18th century tavern style period room. So this is literally in Hamilton when they are in that bar scene singing, the room where it happened. So Lin-Manuel was inspired by Fraunces Tavern when he wrote those scenes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
I'm actually in the room where it happens. Yes.
We're not lying.
I beat Burr.
Well, Burr and Hamilton actually dined here the week before their duel.
Oh, fascinating.
So it was the December 4th Independence Day dinner of the Society of the Cincinnatus. And they had rented out the room because it was still a public dining room at the time. And they I don't want to say dined across from each other because Hamilton allegedly, according to reports, was a little bit drunk. He was dancing on tables and being very jovial like we know him, and Burr was kind of like stewing in the corner like this. But the duel had been established. Nobody knew about it. So it was the fact that the two of them dined in such a public way together the week before Hamilton would die.
But there was one person who did know about it. From what I read, John Trumbull. Wasn't he in attendance as well?
John Trumbull knew,
Yeah.
I think afterwards.
Afterwards, okay.
Yeah.
But he was also here in attendance.
Yeah, so it was a very hush-hush, like the seconds knew
Okay.
that it was going to happen, but like the society did not know that that was going to happen. So it was the fact that these two men came in here and like pretended like business as usual. And I'm like, what I would do to be in that room.
And it makes sense that Burr would be stewing because he probably mostly was a stewing kind of guy.
He's very misunderstood. I think Lin-Manuel did a really great job portraying him, but when you learn more about Burr, he was, I mean, one of the most eccentric founding fathers that I think is always overlooked. So I'm glad that he got his due, I guess.
And from what you know of, did Lin-Manuel actually visit Fraunces Tavern?
He did. The cast came for a photo shoot after the musical debuted, somewhere around 2008, and they sat somewhere at our tables over here and they took photos.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Let me show a little bit more details.
Yeah, so this table is really unique. It is a traditional long table for long rooms. So long rooms themselves, because they go back, were meant for things like dancing and large parties.
Yeah.
This would have been a private dining space if necessary. So Samuel Fraunces often rented this room out, or it would have been used as overflow from the tavern space downstairs. So a lot of important things happened in this room. We just launched our 50th anniversary of the last restoration of this room in 1971, which made it an official period room. So a lot of the things that you see are about 50 years old.
Is this the evacuation day room as well?
So the evacuation day banquet was the entire building because there was about 150, 200 people in the building, which is pretty insane because it's not that big of a building. It's 300 years old, but it was only made to be like 3 stories tall.
Right.
So it's very not COVID friendly, the amount of tight spaces that you would be in. But Washington probably came up here and he probably moved around the room a couple of times and moved through the building to say hi to everybody because it was a banquet in his honor, kind of.
And is this the room where George Washington embraces a few of his soldiers
Yes.
and wept?
So on December 4th, about a week later in 1783, it was his last kind of goodbye to his officers because he would come here, he would say goodbye, and he would give his very historic words that we have a little push pedal for, we'll do in a second.
Oh, cool.
He came here, here's a great illustration. He came and he said goodbye to his officers. That's Henry Knox right there. The guy in the red is Thaddeus Kosciuszko, which is very important to remember because he has red doesn't make him a British spy. But it's important to note
Same as the bridge? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, the bridge, Kosciuszko,
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Right here.
It's important to note all of the different uniforms because it shows how many different foreign allies that we had during the war, and it's important to remember the impact of the French and the Spanish during the war.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, let's
so he
play
came
now.
here and he said this.
With a heart full of love and gratitude, I now take leave. I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and long. I cannot come to each of you, but shall feel obliged if each of you will come and take me by the hand.
That's
Beautiful.
it.
That's
The brevity of the whole speech. And they all went up to him, and Henry Knox approached him first, and it was a very emotional moment because it was the last time a lot of these men were going to see each other after being around each other for an entire decade. Henry Knox is larger than George Washington. So George Washington is maybe 6'2", 6'3", 250. Henry Knox is like 6'3", 350.
Wow.
So you have these 2 huge, very masculine men embracing each other in tears because of how sad they were.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting. Not too much machismo in the.
No,
the
they were all like,
American
I gotta
Revolution.
go home now, I'm done.
Right,
I'm
right.
done.
That's fascinating.
George had promised to be home by Christmas for Martha, so he had things to do. He had to go give in his resignation. He was going down to Annapolis in a couple of days, and he was going back to Virginia. And he thought that was his life. He was going to be back as a gentleman farmer, and he was just going to be a private citizen.
Under his cherry and vine tree, was it?
Oh, his cherry tree?
Cherry
Another
tree, yeah.
good folklore. Yeah, but it didn't work out that way, as we know now. I don't think he knew that was going to happen either.
No. Let's show a little bit more.
Yeah, show the detail. The sword is pretty cool as well.
SF Field asks, is there any paranormal activity here?
Yes, tons. We were just talking about that. In a 300-year-old building, you definitely have...
Creeks, right?
Definitely, very much. We had a paranormal investigation company come in, Gotham Paranormal, and they were able to pick up some audio, but I've worked here almost 5 years. I've worked here at all different times of day and night, and luckily they're not mean ghosts is the only thing that I can say.
And okay, so here we see a very important detail. I love that you included this. Are those oyster shells?
Those are oyster shells dug up from the area around us. So as skyscrapers started to be built in this area, the archaeological excavations that would go on would produce things like oyster shells. But those are actually tiny in comparison to like 18th century oysters that would have been like the size of your forearm.
Right, because we used to have oyster pies, for example.
Yeah, so Samuel Fraunces, when he would cook, was known for his like pickled and fried oysters because we're on Pearl Street.
Oh my God, that sounds so good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a vegetarian, not so good, but like, yeah, that was one of his delicacies.
That was basically the hot dog before the hot dog.
Yeah, and
like
they
everyone
pick
ate
up.
that.
There's a great book on oysters in New York City.
Yes, The Big Oyster by Mark Pulaski.
Yes. I am slowly making my way through that as like I do my research, and every time I pick it up, I'm like, this is such a good book.
Before we continue, who is Samuel Fraunces?
So Samuel Fraunces is the owner of 54 Pearl from 1762 to about 1785. He is a patriot during the Revolutionary War. We know a few things about him, but we don't know much about him. So we know that he came to New York City in 1755, registered himself on the census as an inn holder, but we don't know much more other than that. So there's always ongoing research like I'm doing right now to kind of pick together the 1760s part of his life. So he opened up the Freemasons Bar up Broadway by like Greenwich in the 1760s, and he actually sold that place and bought this building, which was a great location because, I mean, if you don't see the giant traffic lights outside, this was the Great Dock. You were right outside, so you would have had merchants and trades and animal and livestock and just noise. This was the perfect place for a bar, and he registered that, and it really, really was. This became a haven for patriots during the Revolutionary War, so much that like this was a headquarters for the Sons of Liberty.
And people mentioned that he was of mixed race.
That is also a very great ongoing research question that I have had to take up because we don't know where he came from, and because there's so many different sources of he came from the West Indies or he came from England. We've heard it all. I promise you guys that I'm always looking into this because it's something that I think is very important to prove because we want to know who this man was.
Similar to the owner of the Ear Inn, or what is now the Ear Inn.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was also one of George Washington's aides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was Samuel Fraunces went on to be a steward during the first after in 1789 at the first presidential manor. He ran the Washington household. We want to know who this man was. He's very important to American history.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
And okay, so here we have the bar.
Yeah. That's the next best talking point.
No photos. So you've probably had tourists before could jump in the back or try to.
Yeah, you can't stop them from trying to pour a drink. So these were all jugs, again, with archaeological excavations that have been found over the years.
Oh.
One of my favorite points is that every so often we find oysters that come up from the basement because we're on landfill.
And there used to be huge oyster middens along the shore.
Yeah. But the bar itself would have been more caged in, so this is not as historically accurate as it can be. Much like when you put down the cages at when a store closes at the end of a day, there would have been something like that because you want to lock in your liquor because it was expensive and you don't want drunk people taking it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And Babu asks, Ear Inn or Erin? This Ear Inn is the other historic
Ear Inn
bar.
it just closed, right? It's down. It was down by the seaport.
It was down, but it's still there. The building is
the building is there. Yeah.
I mentioned it because it's also related to George Washington.
What isn't?
Yeah, right. What isn't? Right. That's fascinating. Beautiful. All right, let's continue.
All right. So we're gonna head on upstairs.
43906
If you have any questions for Mary, feel free to ask.
Yes, I love questions. So this is our monument to memory, 300 years of living history. So 2019, 54 Pearl Street turned 300 years old.
Wow.
Yes. So when I say old, I mean old.
Yeah.
So we put together just I say brief, but it's still 300 years of history of the building. One of my favorite things to point out are these two, because when they did the huge 20th century restoration, they found original 1719 materials. Oh. Yeah, so here in the plaster, if you look really close, you can see horsehair. Because that would have helped to bind it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then these were all hand-hewn beams underneath the long room as well.
And this was originally built for the Delancey family.
For the Delancey family. There's no actual evidence that they built the house to live in it.
Okay.
But evidence shows that they probably built it for like mixed use, like a storefront on the bottom and like apartments up top.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
They had mixed use back in the colonial times.
Listen, if you can make a couple bucks storing somebody's stuff on the Great Dock, you're going to do it, right? And then this is what the tavern would have looked like in the 80s.
Was it a tourist attraction back then?
Oh, it's always been a tourist attraction.
Okay.
So even after the tavern closed, I think there's a photo in the corner over here.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Right there, 1980s.
You can kind of see it over here. So in the 1800s, the building became a boarding home, but the long room always stayed as like a communal space because they even wrote it on the walls outside. George Washington was here. Oh, yeah.
Fascinating. Also, that has been like a stereotype or
it's
a
never
joke for
lost.
many years.
Yeah, it's never been lost that Washington came here and that this was an important piece of American history.
Oh, okay.
So even as the building changed, you could always go in and rent the long room, and I kind of associate it with like a dorm room common space.
Yeah.
This is the best way I can describe it to the young people.
Oh, fascinating. Also shares another similarity with the Ear Inn, because the Ear Inn used to have a boarding house on the top.
Yeah. So that was traditional during the time, especially as the neighborhood changed. I mean, a series of fires completely changes the facade of the building, and they start adding on layers. So when the restoration happened in 1907, they tore it all down, and they made it look like it would have in the 1780s.
Oh, so since we're in this room talking about the history of the building, there was an attack here.
In the 1970s, yes.
Yeah, what happened?
So the FALN,
Not to be
tricky-
confused with
yeah.
flan.
Yeah.
You always think of flan
yeah,
as the initial.
it's switched.
The other way.
Yeah. They, a representative from their organization was very disgruntled.
Yeah.
It's very tricky. I don't want to discuss. I don't like discussing when people die in the building because I find it's a very heavy subject. But there was a bombing. Somebody threw a suitcase into the building, more towards the Anglers Club entrance that's downstairs on the restaurant side. It killed a few people. It injured a dozen more, and there's still a crack in the foundation from that eruption.
Oh, that's so sad. And they have a plaque outside.
There's
right?
definitely a plaque outside.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. And the green room is very calming, says Alexandra.
Yeah. And then you can see here original building materials. So the Delanceys, because they were one of the richest families, spared no expense.
Yeah.
And they had all of the yellow brick. The iconic yellow brick that's outside of the building is all handmade Dutch, like by Dutch hands. And they had it imported.
Were the Delanceys Dutch or were they British origin?
The Delanceys originally, through the Van Cortlands, would have had Dutch origins.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, so they, so when they move up to Delancey Street, they buy another orchard space, and that's where they lived.
And then they were ousted during the American Revolution.
Some of them, yes, were patriots, and some of them were mostly loyalists. Still important to talk about.
Fascinating.
But you can see some nails and some rods and iconic yellow brick, which is amazing because you think of somebody making that in a kiln and then having to cross the Atlantic Ocean with that. And you're like, you could have just made brick here.
Right, precisely.
You're supposed to buy in the country.
Ali says that he heard the name Delancey in the musical Newsies.
I believe it.
Oh, fascinating.
I've not seen Newsies, but I do believe it. They're a very popular name.
And a few people already asked, are school groups here? I think constantly, right?
Before COVID, we were usually sold out. We would have 1 or 2 school groups in the morning here. And we would lead fun educational tours about being a tavern keeper and George Washington, of course. But since COVID, we haven't had the ability to have school kids in. But here's what they would have looked like in the 70s. So that's the long room that we were. And you can see it's changed because the bar is not there anymore.
I'm actually shocked I grew up in Queens and we never had a field trip here. Now thinking about it, it's like, oh wow, why didn't we?
I remember, I'm from Brooklyn. I remember post 9/11 not being allowed to go on any school trips.
Oh yeah, I think
so. They shut that down completely for a couple of years.
I think that might be the reason.
So I was like, why didn't I come here? And now I am leading all these tours for all these kids, and I'm like, you don't know how lucky you are.
And kids, I assume nowadays really enjoy, or a portion of them really enjoy the history because of Hamilton.
I worked at Trinity Church before this when Hamilton first debuted, and it was wild to see people come in and start mentioning names that I didn't know that they knew. So I was having discussions with 4th graders on Hercules Mulligan, and I was like, where did you learn this? Who told you that name? I'm like, I'm really glad, but who told you that name?
That's fascinating.
I love it. It's great. It's what I wish I had when I was a 4th grader.
Have you visited Hans asked, have you visited the ancestral home of George Washington?
At Mount Vernon?
Yeah.
It was on my to-do last summer.
Oh, no, he says ancestral, so he means in England.
No.
Teen and Ware.
I have not gone that far.
Yeah.
I wish I had. So this is our McEntee Gallery. It is a bunch of objects that highlight the efforts of the SRNY. So the SRNY is the Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York who bought the building in 1900 and restored it to a restaurant and museum.
Oh, fascinating.
So they do, because they're a genealogical group, they have ties to the Revolution. So all of their ancestors come from the Revolution. So they've been keeping some of these traditions alive. So every year we do Flag Day on June 14th. We do Nathan Hale Day and a bunch of other stuff like Talmadge Day.
Oh, fascinating. Is there Nathan Hale related things in here?
We have a few. We've got a statue or two.
Ooh,
they're over there.
Because that ties into Washington's spies.
Yes. Yeah. So we have, if anybody has ever seen AMC's Turn, Talmadge is the leader of the Culper spy ring.
Yeah.
So we have his memoir. So Talmadge was in the room during Washington's farewell, and he's the only written account that we have of the farewell. So his ancestor, his great-great-grandson, was one of the founding members of the SRNY to purchase the building. Yeah, so we've got the first-hand account in that beautiful handwriting.
Oh, it's very nice. And Cauliflower leaves a super chat. He says, I love the historical information. Thanks to the tour guide. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Give hearts right now to Mary for giving us such a detailed tour.
I swear my mom's not watching.
Wow, beautiful handwriting.
Yeah, the handwriting is pretty amazing.
And it seems like to be a pretty long book.
So this is his memoir. So he wrote it about 30 years after the fact. So it includes things like the farewell, his time at the Culper spy ring, his time post-war of how he became working in politics and became part of the Connecticut Society and New York Society. Yeah. So chock full of great information.
And let's show a little bit more.
Yeah,
here.
there's a bunch of stuff. So the cocked hat is one of my favorites because it's traditional for the SRNY president to wear it at the ball every year.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a traditional.
Where can I find one of those?
Yeah, and then you've just, I love saying the word knickknack, so I get to say it here.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different knickknacks here. You've got your Betsy Ross flag, you've got your pen.
When do you think this started as a tourist destination? You said it's
1907,
been always.
probably when it
1907.
opened up as a museum. Yeah, we've been kicking for a while.
Because I know some places were left derelict related to the revolution in the late 1800s.
Yeah, so
Or
that's when
Federal Hall.
the colonial revival movement started really picking up, and these ties to more connected versions of history. So before that, you would go to big battle sites. You would go to like Gettysburg, or you would go to like Saratoga. But these genealogical groups, these historical groups and antiquarian groups really start pushing to have a closer tie and a real connection, because it's a much more accessible version of history to come to this museum downtown where you already live than to take an entire trip to Virginia.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, so they were trying to bring history this way, which is a great, I mean, my job is to make history accessible and interesting. So the fact that 100 years ago, a bunch of groups were like, no, we got to open up this place. I was like, thank you.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we describe that very quickly? Like what we would see out here back in George Washington's time?
So if
Looking
we
out the
are
window.
looking at 1783, we would not see the Downtown Alliance
No.
or the city bikes, but you would have seen things like people walking by, horse and carriages. Pigs were allowed to roam New York City. I think it was like 1840, 1850. So you definitely would have seen that. Wagons going by, markets going by, lots of loud noises, lots of screaming, lots of trading, maybe some drunk people being kicked out of the building.
So there was hustle and bustle.
For
here.
sure, yeah. Because we were at the tip of New York City, all of that incoming
Yeah.
trading in goods that were coming off the ship, all of that like haggling would have happened down by the water instead of inland.
Oh, fascinating.
So when Samuel Fraunces wants to learn the news, you'd come to a tavern next to the water because he would have the first access to all the newspapers coming and all the broadsides coming. He knew what he was doing. He was a smart guy. So here you have a little bit more about Flag Day. Here are some other photos. So normally we have a giant parade, but I don't think that will be happening this year again, unfortunately.
It's usually in June?
Yes. So June 14th, 1777 is when the Continental Congress adopted the design of the American flag. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the flag gallery, but
cool.
we do that every year to honor the flag resolution. So here's a little bit about Nathan Hale.
So tell us a little bit about Nathan Hale, because people rarely talk about him just in general.
It's very misunderstood.
But he's famous, sorry to interrupt, but he's famous in Long Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Nathan Hale is very misunderstood in many different ways. You have somebody who wanted to serve his country and be a spy, but being a spy at this time was not a very gentlemanly-like thing to do, because if you think back to European standards of military to do, you weren't a spy because your general was good enough that he didn't need extra information. So when you think of somebody signing up to be a spy, you're like, oh. So he signed up. They didn't really send him in with a lot of good covering. Like, he took his own Yale diploma with his name on it as like evidence, but he was using another alias and another thing. Like, it didn't need to happen, but it did happen, and Washington did learn a lot from his death.
Yeah.
But it was a very unfortunate situation. He also did not say those very famous lines.
What was the famous lines?
If only I had one life to give for my, I only regret that I have but one life for my country. He did not say that. Nobody wrote that down. Everybody saw this as like a young guy that was being hung as a spy because he got caught. It was a very unfortunate situation. I wrote a very wonderful blog about it on the website if anybody wants actual details. But they would not have written down this little guy's last words.
So it's part of the mythologizing.
Yeah, it just goes into like the
American
folklore
Revolution.
of the American Revolution of like they used his death as this martyrship of they have to, you know, drum up feelings.
Yeah, of course.
That's probably the best way to say it. I don't know. Every time I read about Nathan Hale, I'm like, he didn't need to die.
Right.
It's a very unfortunate situation. He was very bright. He was friends with Benjamin
Very
Talmadge.
well dressed as well.
Yeah, he was friends with Benjamin Talmadge. I think had he not been caught, he would have had a very noteworthy military career in the Revolutionary War because he was very bright. It's a very unfortunate situation. And you're just like, why did you take your Yale diploma with you?
Right.
You're lying about another name.
George, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate it. Ooh, and nice that you have some newspaper clippings here as well. Oh, and some old coinage, centennial medals.
Who doesn't love old coins?
And Rebecca mentions the name Patrick Henry. Does that ring any bells?
Patrick Henry, yes. Ooh, you guys, it's been a really long time since I've given a tour.
Let us know who he is.
Yes, Patrick Henry he did another famous quote, and I'm blanking.
Let us know the quote in the comments.
Somebody will tell me. This is my favorite case in the museum. Again, Washington themed, but for the most weird reason. Down here, you can see a fragment of Washington's tooth. Now, when I say tooth, I mean part of his dentures. Okay. So Washington had terrible teeth his entire life. He started losing them at 23, 24. This is a piece of ivory that would have been part of one of the sets of dentures that he has. Now, if you guys want, you can go look at Mount Vernon's website because they have an entire full set of dentures. Because this was made of ivory, it's really important to note that it's a sign of wealth because where were you getting ivory from at this time if it's hippopotamus or elephant tusk?
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Do we know which type of ivory this is?
We just know that it's ivory. We've never had to do any kind of follow-up on the material because it's very expensive and we're scared of fragmenting it.
Of course, yeah.
But his regular teeth, his denture set would have usually been a mixture of human teeth and animal teeth. So the human teeth would have come from a bunch of different ways. He was known to have paid his enslaved population on the plantation for their teeth. Ooh, there's children here. Yeah. He would have paid for his lower teeth, and then that top teeth would have been animal. So the cow teeth or horse teeth, and it would have been shaved down to make it look not as Hollywood veneer-y like we know today. Yeah. But they definitely did not look natural. So Washington was a man of very few words. He didn't really eat a lot of steak. Very easy chew food. So we're thinking fish, turtle soup, easy things like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It goes to show that's why there probably isn't that many movies on George Washington's biography yet, at least.
No.
Probably be a very depressing latter half.
Regardless, he was viewed as a rock star. He was viewed as a very handsome man. He's 6'2". You think of Washington, you're going to look at him. There's probably a good photo of him in here of full military regalia. He's wearing his tricorn hat. This is the man that you want to date. But sometimes he had no teeth.
And there's a misconception because sometimes people look at this piece of wood and they think that
he did not have wooden teeth. That's another really good folklore that's been going around. Wood do not make really good teeth because they expand with water and it would be impossible to eat with them. This piece of wood is a coffin fragment from when he was originally interned in Virginia, and then they had to reintern him again. So much like when people took a piece of the Berlin Wall when it was coming down, people like to take mementos. So this was a memento that was taken. The last piece in this chest is a little questionable, but I still like to show it. It is allegedly a lock of his hair. So funerary customs, funerary jewelry, Eliza Hamilton had a ring made of Hamilton and her hair. So because it doesn't decompose, so you would take a lock of it at important moments like a child's birth, a baptism, a death, a wedding, and you would make something from it, or you would keep it maybe in a family Bible or a sacred book in your family. Because Washington and Martha never had heirs, George and Martha didn't have any heirs, This was DNA tested around the bicentennial when the FBI wanted to get involved in the festivities, because everybody was sending in hundreds of different samples of other alleged Washington hair lockets. They did test it against his like sister's great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter.
Yeah.
But it's been oxidized, so the FBI said maybe.
Ah, interesting. And,
We're going to take the maybe.
And what point of his life?
Unclear.
It might have been.
Unclear.
Okay.
We
because
have,
it's brown as opposed to white.
yeah, so it's been oxidized.
Yeah.
Or he did have a little bit of a reddish tint on his hair. So, I mean, we have a lot of unknown locks of hair in our collection.
Fascinating.
So people, you know.
Just like unknown beds that George Washington slept on.
Yeah, he's been here, he drank here, he slept here, you know, he pointed here, he sat on this tree. Like,
here.
you could put a marker here everywhere. It doesn't matter.
Laureen gives a super chat and says she loves your energy for giving the tour. You're very articulate.
Thank you. This, again, going back
swords.
to things that have been dug up in the neighborhood. All of this stuff has been dug up in the neighborhood as the skyscrapers go up.
Wow.
So it's a blessing and a curse of we don't get direct sunlight anymore. We're pretty much hidden because we are such a tiny building. But it gave us great excavation. Like this is, I mean, cannonballs.
Oh,
We've got cannonballs.
Did any of them crash into the building during the Revolution?
Yeah, thanks to Hamilton.
Oh.
Yeah.
What happened?
One night in August of 1775, the Hearts of Oak, that he was a volunteer company in, decided that they were going to steal some cannons. And then the British noticed it because they were in the harbor. And they started firing on the island. And one of them came right through the roof of Fraunces Tavern.
Oh my God.
We know it is Cannonball Day. Nobody was injured as far as we know, but that ball buster, man, just starting fights with the British for no reason, destroying public property.
Sounds like him.
And then you wonder why people are loyalists. And you're like, oh.
And this was his King's College days.
Yes,
as well.
King's College days. So he would have been down there with Hercules Mulligan. And these are punch bowls.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So these are
whose
very
likeness is that?
not, I would imagine, George.
He has a mustache, though.
It says Washington's farewell on it. So
Oh, fascinating. No,
maybe
I mean,
it was really nice
the jug over
memorabilia.
here.
Oh,
The jug over here.
it's Washington.
Washington.
It's got to be
Fascinating.
Washington. It's always Washington. The punch bowls were,
That's fascinating.
I mean, full of very heavy
Wow.
liquor. We have a fish punch recipe out if you guys want to check that out as well. So traditionally, like a big bowl would have had a spoon to put all of the cups in, but something smaller like this would have been passed around the table from person to person and you would have sipped from there. So not COVID friendly, but still would have done the job.
No wonder George Washington got the flu and
Yeah.
or cold.
Yeah, no wonder.
one of
They
those two.
didn't know about germs. It's all good.
So they use hard liquor for some of their recipes.
Oh yeah,
Fascinating.
much, because water wasn't really accessible at the time and it wasn't clean, and you were more likely to not get sick, but you would get drunk.
What was the main liquor drink of choice in the tavern? Was it beer?
It would have been a mixture of beer, ale, or like a rum situation.
Okay.
So a little bit of both.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
fun fact for anybody who has been here, when you walk through any type of like staircase here,
Yeah.
you're going through a different building.
Oh,
So it's a
fascinating.
complex of 5 buildings today. So you've left 54 Pearl Street and you're now in like 102 Water.
Ah, okay.
So every time you enter like something that's like Weeble Wobble,
Yeah.
they didn't level the buildings out when they squished them all together because it happened at different times. So they just left it, they put a hole in it, and they were like, here's a staircase.
And they were united before it became a museum.
Yeah, so between like 1850, between like 1930 and 1970, 1980 even,
Yeah.
they started acquiring all the buildings in the area on the block.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's show the old city here. We got Manhattan, and we got the entire island.
Yeah, so
Mostly
this is
wilderness.
great to show you just how packed everybody was in the 18th century. So like this is City Hall Park.
Yeah.
This is the outskirts of New York City, which is wild.
And how many levels were most of the buildings?
A couple of stories because again, no elevators, so it had to
Right,
be
of
as like
course.
as willing as you wanted to walk up the stairs. Which for me, my limit has always been
Yeah.
a 3-story walk up. I will not buy any kind of apartment or rent anything that's more than a 3-story apartment.
Yeah, usually the human limit, people say it's around 6 stories.
Oh my God,
for
6?
for most pre-industrial buildings.
Ooh, 6. That sounds no.
Because there's some ancient Roman buildings and there's some ancient skyscrapers in,
Oh no.
in
No.
North Africa there are 6.
I'm too out of shape for that. No way. But you can see Fort George over here,
Absolutely.
its tiny little dot, and how New York City was and how it's expanded. And there's your outline of Central Park.
Oh, they even outlined it.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
This is a cool map.
It
Love
is.
it.
It's got a lot of fun detail on it.
There we go. New York City used to have hills, hence the name.
Hills, bobcats, bears,
Oh, really?
wildlife. It was crazy.
Oh, that sounds kind of cool.
Yeah. This gallery is dedicated to the Sons of Liberty in New York. So when they had their headquarters here, so the Sons of Liberty were very much like action first, ask questions later kind of group, in that they were known to cause a stir, to make a point. So they would do things like tar and feathering and burn effigies, which are 2 of my favorite things to talk about because they're absolutely insane.
So Samuel Adams' depiction in the show, John Adams from HBO.
Oh, with Paul Giamatti.
Is very
Yes.
accurate. Because Samuel
The
Adams
tar
is-
and feathering
yes.
is the one, that scene is the one that I usually send people to look at.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it's the most Hollywood you're gonna get with how just obnoxious this process was. Because it's not a fun thing to get tar and feathered, but they make it look cool.
Because in the show, John Adams is a bit embarrassed of his cousin Samuel.
Yeah,
who's
it
Sons of
happens.
Liberty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh,
So this is your 18th
musket.
century brown Bess. So this is what a traditional musket would have looked like. So if you had enlisted in the Continental Army, you would have had to bring your own musket. So we're looking at like the right to bear arms Second Amendment, but it was very traditional and expected for each household to have a gun for protection for things like wildlife in New York City, or to protect yourself from your crazy neighbors if necessary, or even if the British were coming. So when a man would leave to enlist, it often left a household without a gun. So women had to learn how to protect themselves in other ways. So you don't need guns.
Oh, fascinating. Because these fired so slow.
Yeah, so even the
a lot of
most-
people had to know how to use bayonets or knives.
So yeah, traditionally they would have come with a bayonet.
Yeah.
Even the most experienced marksman, it would have taken about 90 seconds to fire one shot. So you would do it in line of like, the first row would go, and then the second line was preparing. So once you were done firing, you'd go to the back of the line.
Yeah.
And it was like a very regimental process.
And they also had to bring their own uniforms because mass uniforms started becoming in use in Civil War.
Yeah, there wasn't enough money. I mean, we were broke during this war.
Right.
We were really young, scrappy, and hungry during this war. So you'd bring your own gun. You'd have to supply everything down to your own shoes and your backpacks and your traveling. But
fascinating.
sometimes your food rations were covered.
Are these fragments of
Yes.
any bullets here?
No, we don't have any bullets, but this is, again, more fragments from excavations in the neighborhood. So you can see authentic rock and shell and stuff.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. And then another weapon, which is really fun to point out, is your halberd. So if you didn't have a gun, sometimes they'd give you a halberd. Very medieval.
That is very medieval. I wonder who carried that into battle.
Oh, I hope it was me. In a past life, I hope. So this is the last big show that we have. This just opened in April.
Yeah.
It has my name on the wall, so I'm a little biased as to how good it is. This is about regimental flags in the 18th century, so American regimental flags. So To the Beat of Their Own Drums was looking through our color guards collection and picking out ones that really told the story of the importance of these regimental flags. So when you think literacy rates, they're quite low in the 18th century, so people spoke through symbols. So we wanted to look at those symbols and really take a look at what was important to these men who were fighting. So the May 20th, 1775 one, the Hornet's Nest of Charleston, South Carolina, right? It's a very antagonistic, nobody goes up to a hornet's nest and like, this is gonna end well for me.
No.
So that was a very important symbol for them.
Oh, fascinating. To look very kind of like
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah, this was a very much like, I dare you to mess with me. Like, it's a very opposite of like a Winnie the Pooh situation.
Right.
And then you have like a very classic We Are One that has the inscriptions of all of the colonies together of, this is the first time there's an American identity, the unity is coming together.
Are there 13 rings?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and then We Are One, you know, you have your classic sun symbol, you are the center, you are the brightness.
Beautiful copper color as well, gold
Yeah,
color.
this one of my favorites as well.
No royal insignias, it appears.
No, this is it. This is our identity, right? We've got to make it for ourselves. I always love a good snake because the snake is one of the very amazingly classic identities so the timber rattlesnake that's based off of is only indigenous to like the United States.
Oh, fascinating. And where in the United States?
Northeast, southeast, right? Only on the East Coast. So when you see a snake, it was just like, this was us, right? So the timber rattlesnake is a very calm, cool, collected snake unless it's attacked. So it's a very good representation of what the colonies felt like during the war, of like, we were cool here, we were gonna pay a little bit of taxes, everything was fine, and then you struck us, so we're going to strike back. So you start to see Benjamin Franklin starts using a snake. It starts showing up in cartoons. It starts showing up on flags, right? Everybody knows the chopped up flag from the American Guesser from Benjamin Franklin. That's kind of like that.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I love a good snake.
And join or die, so it means like they saw it as a life or death situation.
Yeah, they knew that there was no going back and that needed to happen.
Like over here as well, liberty or death.
Yeah.
Why did they see it such as a life or death situation when it was mostly about taxes and
there's no going
corporate
back.
ownerships and things like that, royal
corporate
charters?
Ownerships.
Yeah.
So 20th century.
Well, they had royal charters and they contested that.
So there's no going back. So if you think about it this way, every person who put their name on the Declaration of Independence, and we had gone forward with it, right? So George Washington is public enemy number one to King George. You catch him, you kill him, that war is over. And then subsequently, any other man who had signed that Declaration of Independence would have been hung. And it would have been done in a very public way to prove a point.
Right.
Because you're going up against the most powerful nation in the entire world at this point. So it really was a life or death situation. Because the consequences to this, what was considered like a scuffle at the beginning and becomes a full-fledged 8-year-long war, is where do you go from here? They're not going to let you walk away. They're going to jail you. They're going to take everything they can from you.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a very serious situation. This is not like standing up to your professor and being like, I want a B. You're going to give it to me. This is like, no, this is bad.
That's funny. Yeah, because you can see how the English reacted to the Scots when they invaded.
Yeah, even into like the IRA, like that. Nobody takes to being separated. And then you have some early American flags and how the flag code influenced it. So the flag code, which is right here, so it's resolved that the flag of the 13 United States shall be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white on a blue field representing a new constellation. That's super vague.
Right.
In that, like, we know what kind of colors we want and we know what kind of stars we want, but how? So that's how you start getting these, because they're all kind of right.
Yeah.
But they're all very different.
I mean,
but they're all still right.
That describes my home country's flag of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, see?
So
it could be anything.
It could be anything, yeah.
Like we have, like you can't make a purple flag, we know that, but it could still be one of these flags.
And do you know why they chose red, white, and blue?
It was, I mean, the connection to the Union Jack is there. So it's, you're still paying homage to that flag in a certain way of, we still know them, because even up until the Declaration of Independence, everybody thought that they were British. That was the biggest connection, was like, why are you treating me like this? We're the same, even though we're an entire ocean apart. We still abide to the king and queen.
Oh, fascinating. Wow. A lot of people are asking me about the bricks. Are they original? Ali asks, are they original bricks?
These are original bricks to the 1840 structure. Some of them have been replaced in the last couple of years, I'm not going to lie to you.
Of course, yeah.
But these are solid bricks. So the room that you're in is actually one of the oldest sail lofts in the United States. So 58 Pearl used to produce sails for ships, like the big sailing ships. So that's why we have these giant, like, high ceilings.
Did you used to hang them up?
Yeah.
Using these
and you would have walked along there would have been a more extended loft like this, where you would have helped put them together. So they would have either been fully out, because these walls didn't exist, so we have changed walls. More important to like show that this was, we didn't move in this way and leave it.
Right.
But there would have been a longer loft area here, and these huge ceilings that you could fit all of these giant sails in.
Fascinating.
Yeah, somebody had to sew them.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that New York City was the capital of manufacturing for so many.
Yeah, especially after
Almost
the opening.
2 centuries.
Yeah, after
Yeah.
Erie Canal opened, that was it.
Right.
We came back booming.
Right.
Yeah.
So over there, I see, is that the New York flag?
That is our New York City flag. We wanted to make this wall kind of, after you looked at these regimental walls, what flags you would associate yourself with. So we have our New York City flag for our New York City residents. We have our color guard to pay homage to the Sons of the Revolution, because these are all their flags that we were allowed to use. And we have our United States flag. So these were supposed to be...
How many states are in that one?
That should be a 50-state flag.
50 state, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I see.
We toiled with what number of flags that the stars that we should use, but we
Right.
thought the 50 star would be the most appropriate.
Right.
Well, you could have thrown a Ross.
I mean, you might need to change it soon.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's not it changes. It
Right,
changes.
it changes,
DC might add another one. Who knows?
Cauliflower, thank you so much for the super chat. She says everyone slam that like button. Yes, indeed, slam that like button as many as the Sons of Liberty slammed the British royalty.
I like that analogy. Very much so.
And what are these other flags that we're seeing here?
These are other regimental flags. These two in the middle are representative of black regiments during the Revolutionary War.
Okay.
So the Rhode Island Regiment, the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, and the 1st Rhode Island Regiment were
Black as an African American?
as an African American. Blacks were allowed to enlist in in the Revolutionary War in 1777. Washington opened it up to them. In some instances, especially in Rhode Island, when they had low enlistment rates, what would end up happening is that enslaved masters would offer up their enslaved men to enlist in the army as like cash reward. So it's like they would be enlisted, and at the end of it they would gain their freedom, but those masters would get like paid back from what they paid for these people. So it's very problematic.
Right.
Super problematic, but it boosted the enlistment rates.
And in New York, there was freed African Americans here at that time.
Even in Boston.
Is there in Boston as well? Is there evidence of them
so the
fighting?
Bucks
Yeah.
were another Massachusetts-based unit. So they were based in Boston. They were ordered to protect merchant property because Boston was such a hot spot during the Revolutionary War. So the Bucks would have been one of those.
And the biggest city at the time.
I think Philly beat them.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's either
depending
Philly.
on what year it was. One of them,
Right.
the three of them, just kept like outweighing each other. So
Right.
it depends on what year.
And this purple one's beautiful. What is this purple?
So this is the inspiration for the New York State flag. So this is one of the New York regiments. This was redone by a member of the Sons 2004-ish. So artistic licensing was taken, but it's basically a copy of. The regimental flag is a copy of what the New York State flag ends up being. So you've got your Lady Justice with her sword and her scale. You've got a bald eagle on top of the world. It's got your New York State motto of Excelsior, which means to be the highest, to be the higher one.
Yeah.
Latin's not my strong suit, but it's all up there.
Every time I think of Excelsior, I just think of Stan Lee from Marvel Comics because that was his that was his
thing,
motto,
right?
Yeah. And he's a New Yorker, so that's
There you
funny.
go. That's where he got it from.
And this one seems rather Freemasony.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this one is one of my favorites as well. This is the Pulaski Legion banner.
Okay.
So Casimir Pulaski, another Polish man, along with Kosciuszko.
Also the bridge?
Yes.
Okay.
Also the bridge. Thank you. Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, I was like, the Kosciuszko Bridge, and of course the kids don't know because they're 4th graders, and
Yeah.
they're like, whatever. But the parents were like, yes, I've got it. And I was like, yes.
It's funny, just a little aside. In Greenpoint, it was one of the biggest Polish communities.
Yeah.
But those Polish names predate the Polish community.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Pulaski and Kosciuszko.
Yeah. So this was a really great intentional post of Pulaski had one of the best cavalry units in the Revolutionary War because a lot of the best military leaders like von Steuben, like Pulaski, were European based. So they had military training because they have military schools. So they came here and they looked at the army here and they were like, oh, this is not going to work. So when you think of how we won the war, it's very important to point out that help that we got. And it wasn't just like a bunch of guys waking up going, we're going to fight. It was like, no. A bunch of people helped, usually European. We have to mention them. The flag.
So they're basically consultants
Really good ones.
Yeah, very
really good ones. My favorite point when I was doing research for this was we unfurled this and I said, what are those things in the corner?
Yeah.
And me and our collections manager, Lisa, spent months trying to figure out, because we realized that more research books on flags will tell you what's on the flags, and they'll focus on like the Latin inscription or the Masonic eye, but they won't tell you what the little figures are. Those are cannonballs. Those are hand grenades. They're hand grenades.
Hand grenades,
I
fascinating.
emailed a few Polish institutes, a few Polish museums, and I finally found a citation in something or another like weeks before the show was going to open, and I was like, I got it. Okay, we can put it in.
I almost thought they were pineapples.
They do look like, that was our original thought. We were like, that's weird that they would put pineapples on their flag, and it didn't make sense, and I refused to acknowledge that, and I'm really glad that I just kept digging.
What is the Latin inscription on that? Regit non oleus?
You know what? There's a booklet here in which I can tell
let
you.
us know. And Panajota says, this is a really informative live stream. Oh, yes. And are there coffee and snacks here? There is.
Downstairs at the restaurant, yes.
There's a restaurant down below.
So the good thing is when you come here is that we have a booklet.
Oh, cool.
And it will tell you everything that you need to know. So the labels are literally on this booklet or a nice QR code. So it says, union makes valor stronger.
Ah,
yeah, that's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can take this home. It's like a little keepsake. It's a coloring book, if I may.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool for kids.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll leave this right now for now. Thank you. Oh, cool. And then, so we have a little bit more here.
We've got a little bit more here. This also goes into, we wanted to highlight one of the flags. One of my favorite flags as a Revolutionary War historian is the Don't Tread on Me, because I mean, it's being used today as well. So it was one of those connections that I knew people would have touchstones to. So we chose an emblem of magnanimity because it comes from the American Guesser, which is, quote, likely written by Benjamin Franklin using this like pen name.
Right.
But it was most likely Benjamin Franklin because of his love for the rattlesnake. So I painted this. I'm very proud of it.
Oh, beautiful. Great job.
Really proud of that part.
Great job with the actual gallery itself. It's very well designed.
It's a lot of work. I will leave that. All of that thanks can go to our collections manager, Lisa, who is wonderful, and I could not have done this without her.
Because this was also one of the oldest rooms, right, in the museum? Because it looked like it hasn't changed in
Everything
in years.
looks really old here, which is great.
Okay.
So if you look up, you can see some of the original hand-hewn when it was built in the 1830s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we teeter between like wanting to upgrade this place, but also keeping its charm and its historical like importance.
Of course,
Yeah.
So Don't Tread on Me, which is also depicted very heavily in John Adams, the series.
Yeah.
What's the history behind this flag?
So it was created by Christopher Gadsden sometime in the 1770s, and it was supposed to be presented to the naval captain at the time.
Yeah.
But there's no proof that he ever used it, which I find strange. So it hung in the room in Charleston, not the Continental Congress, they're like local committee Congress room meeting room. It hung somewhere for a couple of years, and it laid there in perpetuity for a while. And then it kind of like teeters off because there's more important Revolutionary War flags that people would easily identify with. So you have like Washington's battle flag that they would use, or like a Betsy Ross. Right. And then sometime towards like the 1970s, 1980s, it starts to make this reemergence because it's a very like, it's Don't Tread on Me. So it's very like personal rights based.
Yeah.
So 1970s, 1980s, there's a lot going on. You've got an economic depression going on.
Are the colonists the snake?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
fascinating.
So you see this changing meaning of how you go through the bicentennial again and you start to see these reemergence of things that you haven't looked at in 100, 200 years. And it starts to be picked up by like some environmentalist groups start using it of like Mother Earth is the snake. And you start to see that. And then you start to see it used by people who are trying to protect their individual rights. So you see it all, across the amendments, First Amendment, Second Amendment, stuff like that, of don't tread on me. So it's a very dicey subject to even talk about in the first place.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And who was the creator of the flag?
Christopher Gadsden. He's actually right here.
Was he a Freemason, perchance?
They all kind of were.
They all kind of were, yeah. Because it seems like also the use of snake is also a very old ancient symbol as well.
Yeah, because they're everywhere. But the Don't Tread on Me is, I mean, it's a great flag to have. I personally love the modern representation that goes for women's rights and reproductive rights. So I've seen this entangled in the shape of a uterus.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. And I love that it's also in taxi cab colors
Yeah,
as well.
it's very bright. It was very untraditional to have a yellow flag. So yellow itself and the color usually meant something bad was going to happen. So you would either have it for like pirates or if there was sickness on board. So the fact that Christopher Gadsden chose yellow to begin with was like, bold choice. Bold choice. But he went with it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for showing us around.
Thank you so much for coming. I hope everybody had a great time.
That brings us to the end of the exhibition,
Yeah, that's
right?
it. You went through 5 whole buildings.
And downstairs there is the historic like bar and restaurant.
Yes, so there's a full bar downstairs. They have a whiskey bar, which, I mean, I'm on the clock right now, but in general is very good. There's over like 100 types of whiskey downstairs. They have like different beers for days. I will always recommend the Sam Fraunces Ale that was custom made for the restaurant.
Oh, cool.
It's a very light, hoppy drink. It's great for summer, great to eat outside with. And it goes with everything on their menu.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And maybe have it with some oysters if they offer them. Because
I think they do have oysters. They should have oysters.
Because then you'll feel like a real New Yorker or like old school New Yorker.
Yeah.
Where can people find more of Fraunces Tavern?
www.frauncestavernmuseum.org. Our social media handles are usually just Fraunces Tavern Museum, so you can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, all the things. We're working on the other stuff.
And I usually have people ask me if it's accessible. What's accessible in the museum for people with mobility issues?
I mean, listen, I'm in a 300-year-old building.
Yeah.
It wasn't built to be accessible. We do our best, so we do have some ramps available. We have an elevator. We do our best on staff to make it as comfortable for those who need it as much as we can. But
Okay, cool. You can see at least some portion of the museum.
we're trying.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
You're so welcome.
It was
Thank
such
you.
an awesome in-depth tour.
Yeah.
Everyone give hearts to Mary for showing us around. Everyone keep being awesome and always keep on exploring. Have a great day, everyone. And I usually do a wave goodbye if you want to join me. Okay. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Don't tread on me.